Welcome to my channel, The Magic of Java. This is my third book called The Londo and the Green Queen's Revenge. It's a novel. It's a novel about me coming to terms with the attempted destruction of an Englishman and his Javanese family. But it is a novel. Yes, it's based on experience. It's based on real people and celebrities, but amalgams of real people or caricatures of them. So if you do identify yourself, please forgive me, because it's only intended as a yarn. It's a family affair. Families are important to Indonesians, especially the Javanese. So when I married Mawar, I married her family as well, and in doing so stepped into a feud that I was largely unaware of. This feud is between Mawar's eldest brother, the dukun, his wife and their children, and the rest of the family, rather than the other feud within the ex-husband's family. This feud includes brother number 2, who lives a simple and religiously devout life in nearby Chandi. Brother number 3 is level-headed, hard-working, and lives close to our home in the next desa, and therefore close to the dukun brother. I was rather shocked after writing this to find that he is also illiterate. Shocked because only recently have I realised that the official statistics overestimate literacy rates within Indonesia. This means that none of my brother number 3's official documents tally, meaning that it would be impossible for him to do something like sell some land or even take out a loan. Brother number 4 is equally diligent, but escaped to Sumatra, not wanting to be under the shadow of the dukun. Bude is Mawar's eldest sister, who lives with us, and her husband Mas-Pradipta, until Mawar recovers from lead poisoning. Or should I say, if. Brother number 5 is closer to the dukun than all the others, but lives in the Jakarta hinterland. There is also Mawar's younger sister, who lives in a forest in Cilacap. Unknown to the family for a long time, her home is even more humble than brother number 2's. Actually, brother number 2 got a grant from Jokowi after the election, along with many in our desa, to rebuild his home, which now looks like ours, is made of concrete blocks and has some very nice teak doors and windows. But we need to add to this a number of half-brothers and sisters and their relatives. Yani is a distant relative and old friend, has moved from Jakarta to her home behind ours, having finally adopted a baby, and her husband will eventually join her. Yani's younger brother lives next door, where his wife runs the warung, whilst Mas Purwa is Yani's eldest sister's husband, and lives close by, a little down the mountain. But then almost everybody in our desa is related to Mawar, including the Imam and Pak Haji. All have sided against the dukun brother and his immediate family. Whilst the dukun has not exactly been sent to Tangerang, Banten, my proposal for Indonesia's Coventry, the dukun is certainly isolated. In fact, his isolation reflects his suspected role in the Pesugian murders, which wiped out half the desa, including his own father. Pesugian is a pact to deliver blood in return for wealth. Incredible though it sounds, my experience is that it is still widely invoked in Indonesia. In fact, in Java, one might argue that Pesugian is an unofficial euthanasia, as it is often the weak and the old who are targeted, possibly explaining Indonesia's short life expectancy. I originally met the dukun brother and his children on my first visit to Jogja. I fell in love with Jogja, and whilst not falling in love with the dukun, I immediately liked him. Indeed, as the years passed, we became quite close, until it became apparent that he and his children were cheating us and were actively seeking to harm us. The dukun had on his arm a tattoo of Ganesha, with an ancient Javanese inscription, a script derived from Sanskrit. Seeing this tattoo set me off on a quest to understand more about his beliefs, or religion as I then believed them to be. A quest I deeply regret beginning, but one which I now know I have begun will not release me, even though I already know far more than I ever wanted to. A quest which has ultimately led me to living next door to the dukun brother. I quite like where I live, but I would never have chosen it had I known that my actions would lead me to living there permanently, or at least not yet. The day the dukun took me to Mawar's mother's grave, and I promised the old lady that I would care for her daughter and granddaughters, Widati and Titi. On a subsequent visit, I agreed to build a house in Medesa, on the site of the mother's last home, and this is where we now live. Mawar's mother had made her presence known to me on many occasions, and seems to want me to resolve the feud within the family. But now I believe the dukun has also tried to poison me. It would seem that the sides have been set, and my task is far more difficult than I first perceived it to be. When Omuni and Pa Angabaya poisoned us, our resolution was simple. We left Jakarta, and therefore our contact with them. But as I have always explained to Mawar, that we cannot keep running, and we cannot run again. Those plotting against us have already wasted so much of my money. I simply cannot afford to abandon another home. In any case, the dukun will always be Mawar's brother, and we cannot completely avoid him. With Mawar still not entirely recovered from our poisoning, our home in Gunung Kidul is perfect for her. It's quite healthy, with few things to scare her, and she is surrounded by her loved ones, although not her daughters, Widati and Titi, who remain in Jakarta, whom she misses deeply. Mawar's paranormal helper, Pak Karno, warned us that whilst the dukun was naughty, he would never change, and that was between him and Allah. But the family isolating him and continuing the feud would only make things worse. Whilst completely agreeing with Pak Karno, it would seem that I am now at the centre of this feud. I have repeatedly forgiven the dukun, and still do so. I have been incredibly generous with him, when all around have told me not to. This included buying him a leather belt he had the audacity to ask me for when I took Mawar to Yogyakarta for a few days as a part of a repercussion. But he insists on biting the hand that feeds him. Indeed, his behaviour is so inexplicable to a Brit that I will be greatly challenged in finding a resolution. All my life I would simply have left this issue to fester. Indeed, the problems I now have with my son Branwell are partially because I failed to address the issues with his mother. But now at 60, I am committed to becoming a man. I must deal with the issues with my son and the dukun in a compassionate and adult manner, even though both will stretch me incredibly. But before I even attempt a reconciliation, I must get to the truth as to whether the dukun is trying to poison me, and if so, is this a recent occurrence, or has it been going on for some time? You see, if it is recent, in all probability it reflects his view that I have some way lost him face. I'm not sure that I have, but Indonesians think very differently to Westerners. If this is the reaction, then it is somewhat understandable and manageable. However, if he has been poisoning Made and I since we used to stay with him, then the motive is Pesugian. I will still struggle to comprehend such greed, and whilst I may find a way to manage it, I cannot make it go away. Will I ever come to terms with this greed? It is ubiquitous in Indonesia, but it is hidden from view in the UK, masked by the hegemony of the division of labour and economics. On reflection, even if this poisoning does date back to our staying at his home, he may have just planned to destroy our mental health and not actually kill us. After all, we now pay Bude and Mas Padipta to look after us. Maybe he saw his offspring in a similar role, but given that he is a dukun, I have less hesitation in seeing Pasukian as the motive than even for Omuni and Pa Angabaya. Given the warnings I have been receiving from the spirit world, I have to conclude that Pasukian is the most likely explanation, as the warnings and activity have been so alike those I received when Omuni and Pa Angabaya started independently poisonous in pursuit of Pasukian. Of course, if Pasukian is the motive, then there can be no truce, no making up, as once a target is identified, it is a fight to the death. No, all I can do is show that I will not die, that I will outwit the dukun. Again, not an easy task, as fools often underestimate the intellect of others, believing all around are less intelligent than them. The Dunning-Kruger effect. Why else would the dukun have believed that I would drink the presumably poisoned jamu he gave me, especially after it is so obvious that my family and I have been poisoned before? Much later I realised that it is only a fight to the death, if that is what our assailants and we believe. Omuni had promised human blood in return for wealth. Then he believes he must kill or be killed. So once again, it is in the mind. Only a few days passed, and less than a week since I received money from the sale of my former office. Now, when things are going well, this is the sort of coincidence which happens. But for the last few years, everything has seemed so difficult for me. My every turn, every option appeared to be blocked. And now again, I feel able to face the world and somewhat in control of my destiny. The next morning, I received hundreds of messages from my son demanding the $14,000 it would cost me to build a home in Gunnerkedel for him, so that he can go to Switzerland for assisted suicide. I have told him to seek help, but he believes there is no help in the UK. Is this a realistic appraisal of how psychiatric and adult social services have been dismantled in the UK? If so, how can I or anyone else live with the death of a 22-year-old through lack of care? But then again, I know that we were unable to access help for Branwell until a crisis occurred. Maybe this is leading to another crisis and the help he so obviously needs. I just wish I was in the loop about what is wrong with him, what is his current state of mind, and what, if anything, social services are doing. But as his mother claims sole guardianship, I have no access to such information. He told me that he'd already put his head in the oven because I hadn't sent him any money. At the same time, Widati asked me for some money for some sanitary towels and crispies. I gave her $8, but she wanted 16, and I handled it badly. So I will still have some way to go to being a father. But of course, I really am now a single parent to Branwell, Widiati and Titi. And yes, Branwell and Widiati are old enough to take care of themselves, but they cannot, whereas Titi, still only 17, manages pretty well. It was now Lebanon, the Eid holiday at the end of Ramadan, and Widati and Titi had joined us in Gunnerkedel, whilst Bude and her husband Mas Pradipta had gone to Manyamas, where Bude's daughters live. Mawar began nesting, something I'd seen her do many times, but not something I had completely anticipated. Indeed, as she cleaned and cooked, took control of her own home, and cared for me and her daughters, Mawar was happy and seemed to be returning to her old self. Is this what she needed after all? Mawar's old friend from the main Dessa, who had always cut Mawar's hair in a store in Jakarta's Block M, visited us, and Mawar had her hair straightened. This lifted Mawar immensely, and she began to resemble Maddie once more. I had always believed Bude's hard, Nora-Bati love was just what Mawar needed to help her recover, and it probably was. But now Mawar needs to become Ratu, queen of her own domain again. I had my misgivings about Mespredipta when crippled with paranoia, that he was trying to take my home from me. In fact, I had believed him to be working with Muni and Paerti against us. Let me never fall into the vulgar mistake of dreaming that I am persecuted whenever I am contradicted. Rolf Waldo Emerson in his journals. I was uneasy that Bude and Mespredipta had made themselves a little too comfortable in our mountain home, although there was clearly more to his relationship with Paerti than he was telling us. Furthermore, Bude is taking advantage over Mawar's mental health, such as convincing her to increase her wages and constantly asking for gifts. Then it was also apparent that Bude and Mespredipta were fueling the feud with the dukun brother. Of course the dukun brother was in the wrong, but as our paranormal helper Pak Karno had told us, feuding would only result in a cycle of misery for us all. Mawar obviously felt the same, but neither of us felt able to recognise our feelings, let alone talk about them. In spite of these feelings, we really needed Bude and Mespredipta a little longer. There are still jobs to be done in completing the building of our home. We need to arrange for furnishings and clothing to be shipped from Jakarta, and I need to be shown how to organise the garden, all of which Mespredipta excels at. Although I believe he is making such jobs drag out so that he and Bude can remain with us longer than I would want. Certainly he makes no attempt to show me how to do any of the things I would need to, should he leave. Also, without a car, many things would be difficult without Mespredipta and his motorbike. And whilst Widati is here, I need to discuss with her how best to get our home and our lives back. When I mentioned to Widati, she was horrified at my suggestion of getting rid of Bude and Mespredipta, but she always shrinks from difficult decisions. However, I also began to realise that Mawar was not as strong as I once believed, and resolved to leave things a little while. Also, if I can change the trajectory with the Dukun brother simply by positive thinking, then surely it is much easier to see Bude and Mespredipta's intentions as benign. It's 18 months since our holiday in Sanur, Bali, and I'm keen to take Mawar back for a recuperation, but Bude has told her that she should not go. When Mawar returned from our short break in Jogja, she was confused and unwell, as was I. This was simply the bones and the teeth releasing lead into our blood as we moved into the hot season. It accumulated in me seeing ghosts in Shrewsbury and then outside our house in Gunung But Bude is insistent that Mawar was possessed once more. I'm going to have to use all my patience to cope with Bude caring for Mawar. A positive aspect of Bude being away is that we are able to interact with the Dukun brother and his family. I began to realise that if I believe he had not given me poison jamu, then he hadn't. You see, we can change our outlook and reality by simply changing how we perceive things. Now, it probably wouldn't be a good idea to drink the jamu, as in my experience, even the slightest doubt could give rise to disastrous consequences. But we must remain positive, and in doing so, make our world a better place. Much later, I found a new Ibu jamu was visiting us, selling cheap jamu. The brother had mentioned cheap jamu, and when he gave me some. So I really do need to trust my instincts and not Bude's. In fact, it was Bude's view that Piete's dukun was affecting us that thrust Mawar and I into the paranoid cycle in the first instance. When Mawar was possessed by Putri in Jembra, she came out with a barrage of revelations, mostly about friends and neighbours who had used black magic against us. One accusation, which seemed particularly ridiculous, was about our driver from Wunasari. But when Mawar had become paranoid about people from her past contacting us, but even more so, the daily reminders that she needed to register her phone number, she lost and deleted most of her contacts. I heard that Bude was returning from Banyamas much quicker than I had anticipated, and suggested we need to go to Jogja the next day, as a family, i.e. without Bude. It being Lebanon, Bahaji's son was reluctant to take us, but miraculously Mawar received a message from our old driver. Miraculous, as how did he have a new number? So we went to Jogja with a driver from Wunasari. One might even describe the day as something of a disaster, but we loved it. The roads were so busy with returning Mudik traffic, as was Jogja itself, especially Malibra at night, which was like Blackpool during the lights, but without Tony Blair and Gordon Brown staggering along the Golden Mile, filofax in hand. Widati warned me, wanted to visit Amal, but was soon bored with it. Mawar and I ate a good Indian restaurant, but Widati and Titi had already eaten at Burger King in the Mall. Then, at 20 to 5, the girls left us in our favourite bar, Oxenfree, saying they wouldn't be long and would return at 7 o'clock. I should add that now being teetotal, I drank a juice made from carrot, cucumber, apple and ginger, every bit as refreshing as the Bintang beer I once drank there. It was 10 o'clock before we arrived home, exhausted, exactly what I was thinking to avoid, given Mawar's reaction to our last trip to Jogja. But it was a perfect day. We had a lovely time. For once you are vibrating at a higher frequency, everything in your life becomes not just manageable, but wonderful. Mawar got a little confused in Carrefour, but then who doesn't? In any case, I was able to explain that these were exactly the symptoms I had suffered with for over 5 years, and I knew what to do about them. Maybe that once more we discovered our happy, loving family and knew that together we could face the world once more, or at least this little corner of Java. Or maybe it was my relief at doing something without feeling Bude's control over us. During Lebanon, the news from Jakarta took a bizarre twist. 2 crocodiles were spotted in Jakarta Bay by the most popular tourist attraction, Ancol. At the same time, locals received messages incorrectly stating that entry was free to some tourist attractions, including the zoo. Now, even a saltwater crocodile in the sea of the world's second largest city, with limited vegetation along the shoreline, seems highly unlikely. Was the motivation for this fake news commercial a rival attraction attempting to create bad publicity for other attractions? If so, it backfired, as even more visitors went to Ancol hoping to see the crocodile. Could it have been started by a public agency, maybe to create traffic chaos at a time when Jakarta is so quiet it could be a normal city? Why? Possibly to force the government to provide extra resources or simply sanction overtime payments. Or is it connected to the new governors demolishing the Ruko shop houses on the new man-made islands in the bay? Having written this, a third crocodile spotting occurred in one of Jakarta's rivers, which somehow I have fewer reservations about. Could the whole story be true, or could someone have released a crocodile to achieve the panic it created? Could there be an even more convoluted reason for this fake news? In Indonesia, one has to suspect that there is, and that it's political. My suspicion is that this fake news was created to deflect attention away from some political news that was occurring at the same time. I have to admit that I have no idea what this news is, but at the time Suharto's son-in-law was meeting the organisers of the Ahok debacle in Saudi Arabia. This set me off on another potential smokescreen, and I have to question why Suharto's children have started their own political party, forsaking their father's Golkar party. The truth is, I have no idea what is happening, but I do know that Jakarta is feeling less and less welcome to Westerners and increasingly dangerous. Something is definitely brewing. I do hope that it does not completely descend into murderous tribalism once again, especially as I belong to the tribe that will be murdered. I'm sure that there are some in Indonesia, and indeed elsewhere, who will see the murder of Westerners as progress on the murder of Chinese. I wonder whom. Probably unrelated to the fake news, except that it was related to the man-made islands in Jakarta Bay, was that Jakarta Old Town, Kota Tua, had withdrawn its application for UNESCO listing. The submission had been based on its status as the largest port in 17th century Asia and included the natural islands in the bay. But UNESCO rightly pointed out that no real effort had been made to preserve this 17th century legacy, and indeed much of the heritage had been destroyed. However, UNESCO did find some 20th century commercial buildings which were impressive, but those had not been included in the submission. Indeed, Jakarta was criticised for lacking coordination and a strategy towards conservation, an understatement in the extreme. Ratna, Sarumpite, celebrity politician and prominent member of Suharto's son-in-law's campaign team, provided an even more bizarre news distraction. Ratna accused government supporters of having assaulted her in Bandung, resulting in bruising and swelling to her face. In fact, there was no assault, and her face swollen and bruised as a result of plastic surgery in Jakarta when she claimed to be in Bandung. I guess people as prominent as Ratna occasionally get found out in the West, but when they do, they resign and bow out of public office. This is a cultural nuance I navigate with too much regularity, but never come to terms with. I continually uncover cheating, fraud and even attempted murder, but instead of there being an outcry, I'm ignored because I'm a foreigner, and what could I possibly know? In fact, drawing attention to such issues only highlights my stupidity. But Ratna is an internationally recognised human rights activist, and I somehow believed that if we were to meet, we would immediately connect. Not least as Ratna and his departed husband had owned Jakarta's equivalent to Studio 54. Ratna's rabid opposition to Jokowi defies logic. Does Ratna believe or know something I don't? In fact, to my Western mind, the whole incident is incomprehensible. That is, that an intelligent human rights activist publicly tells such an obvious lie, almost as though she wanted to be exposed. I have to conclude that there is far more to this instance than I could possibly understand. My suspicions were fueled that news of the incidents appeared on Wikipedia far too quickly, including Suharto's son-in-law deciding to sack her as his polls plummeted, and for once I suspect that someone more important than Professor Darwin to be behind it. But this was not the first time Ratna had been caught lying, and she was subsequently arrested for spreading fake news and possible fraud. Once again, I am content in my naivety, as to be anything but a stupid bully Westerner would mean that I am tainted by the very behaviour and thoughts I want to distance myself from. The mass demonstrations continued in Jakarta by the same people who deposed Ahok for whatever surreptitious reason they could find, such as the anniversary of Ahok's imprisonment. This may seem trivial, but the imprisonment of Ahok meant that the perpetrators can get their way, including persecution of minorities and especially bullies. Recently, they attempted to ban the youth wing of Nahdlatul Ulama, the largest Islamic group in Indonesia, which, being Indonesia, is a paramilitary organisation. It is not even worth repeating the details and arguments behind this event, as it was a Muslim organisation attempting to ban another Muslim organisation for an unacceptable insult to all Muslims. Now, as a Muslim, I find it hard to envisage anything I would find an unacceptable insult, and can only comprehend this is yet another attempt to destabilise Indonesia by creating conflict between groups. When such issues are reported, it is actually very easy to spot which people are being manipulative, as it's when they claim it's an insult to their beliefs. As beliefs are always external to the individual, feelings are natural, so the insult is something that you've been told and not actually feel. Nevertheless, as I wrote Christmas cards to my parents and Branwell, I had to think twice, because these dark forces object to anything other than religious Muslim holidays. These are the fears that I thought I had left behind forever when I left Saudi Arabia all those decades ago. After Lebanon, Widiati and Titi left us for Jakarta, and Widiati called us to say that our water pump had broken once again. I wonder, is Omuni placing something, presumably poison, in our well every time our back is turned, and is this causing it to keep breaking? Certainly, on one occasion, the pump had become blocked with orange grains, which I have to believe to be sand, but a metal oxide is equally plausible. Indeed, it may not have been oxidised prior to it being placed in the well. I then heard that the dukun brother's wife was in hospital with an upset stomach. I had a feeling like when Mas Purwa's daughter had got married, that forces beyond my control, or even my wish, were working on my behalf. Maybe the dukun brother really had tried to poison me, but my positive thinking had resulted in harm to his wife. I genuinely wish her no harm at all, and felt that we must visit her. But before we could, she returned home. For if we see everything as love, then everything is much simpler. I like Mawar's psychiatrist and have confidence in her, whilst no Sir Lancelot Spratt, her out-of-hand rejection of my lead-poisoning explanation was causing me to have some doubts. Maybe it was when I explained to Mawar that her weight gain was due to the psychotropic medicines she was taking. But she too started to express doubts. In the West, the medical profession is beginning to accept that the patient actually knows their bodies better than a short consultation with a professional ever could. But such thinking is yet to reach Indonesia. My own doctor in the UK has taken to asking me what was wrong with me and what should be done. Indeed, she knew that I only visited her when I needed to discuss my prognosis, or I needed access to medication for which there wasn't a natural alternative. But when the time came to return to the hospital in Claton, Mawar stated that she didn't want to go. My feelings were mixed. Whilst Mawar cannot provide a scientific explanation for her feelings, they are often right. They're often more right than my own, so maybe I should just accept it. Like the dukun and other services in Indonesia's market economy, medical professionals have an incentive in making their patients dependent upon them. In Mawar's case, this dependency includes an addiction to strong drugs from South Korea. So no matter how knowledgeable Mawar became on the playlists of Ian Levine and Colin Curtis, it was apparent that the psychiatrist would not accept that she was cured. As I have indicated, I believe Mawar's psychiatrist to be a good, ethical woman, but the system means that she has rejected my explanation of the causes and is setting on a much more expensive and potentially damaging solution. It is often said that medicine is one of the leading causes of death. Certainly in the UK, medical errors are the third most important cause, and prescription drugs the major cause of overdose. Less excusable, however, was that the psychiatrist appeared to have no appreciation whatsoever of the music of Blackpool Mecca and was completely unaware of even the Anderson brothers, which leads me to question what they teach them during 10 years at medical school. Although in fairness to the poor lady, maybe the training is less rigorous in Indonesia. I explained that Mawar would be addicted to the psychotropic medicines and that she was to come off them slowly. But for around 4 months, I felt that she no longer needed them. My feelings appeared to be confirmed. Firstly, the appointment was on a Friday and would have meant me missing Jumatan prayers. And secondly, a litre of olive oil was delivered to our home that day, meaning that I no longer needed to visit the supermarket in Claton, where the psychiatrist is based. You will forgive me for believing that I'm clutching at straws for affirmation of our chosen actions, but somehow such signs lift your vibrations and create their own positive outcomes. Think of your life as a wave as it comes up and then dips back down into the ocean. Imagine yourself as this wave, screaming that you're an individual, but you're merely an expression of the ocean, and that the ocean is God. Rumney. His pronouncement coincided with the news that Pak Karno was coming to visit our home for the first time. It was Jumat Klingon in the Javanese calendar, and therefore a perfect time to clean our home, but a little too reminiscent of when I would stay awake on Tuesday and Friday nights, Monday and Thursday to a Western definition of time, until midnight to avoid spiritual possession. Again, my feelings were mixed. I was happy with that Pak Karno would reinforce my view that the psychotropic medicine was no longer needed and would recommend herbal alternatives. But I really didn't want any more discussion of paranormal upsetting Mawar, especially as I knew our home was benign. However, my real doubt was that I knew that his visit had been arranged by Bude and Mass Predictor, probably because they felt Bude's hypertension had a paranormal explanation, but possibly because they felt that something of mine was attracting the Fortean. I'd already sold and cleaned both homes of Jimat and Rafak, and in doing so thrown away a lot of items I could have sold. All I had left was my agate rings, and wasn't prepared to give these up. Prior to Pak Karno's arrival, I asked Mawar to explain to him that she was stopping taking the Western medicine, and could he recommend some herbal alternatives, not least as she was refusing to take the deactivated carbon and spirulina drinks that I would make for her. In fact, she had accepted them once, but I spotted her pouring them down the sink. I also wanted her to point out the wall at the back of the garden in front of Yanni's house and where I kept seeing ghosts. I knew these ghosts to be benign. In fact, they waved at me. I just wanted confirmation from Pak Karno. But when Pak Karno came, there was a set agenda, which didn't include the small talk and requests our visits to him had now degenerated into. My concerns about the nature of Pak Karno's visit were raised when Mawar's second and third brothers arrived at her home, along with the third brother's wife and Mas Purwa, who as MC Jawa took the lead and spokesperson for the family. I was concerned that this was the equivalent of a paranormal lynch mob for the first dukun brother, not least as meeting at Pak Karno's house sometimes felt like this. But again, the agenda was fairly rigid, and there was no talk of brother number one. After very little small talk, Pak Karno asked Bude to mix some leaves with salt. We then all entered a communal meditation with a salt mixture in front of Pak Karno on our coffee table. Brother number 3 then spread the mixture around the house and the perimeter of our garden, with Pak Karno watching over him. Pak Karno returned to say that the house was already clean and there was nothing to concern us. Indeed, Semal Mesem was guarding the front of our home. However, at the back of our garden, by the wall, there was an entity which was quiet and presented no harm, certainly not at the moment. The entity was part snake and part girl, and had been sent by Nirarara Kidal, the Queen of the Seven Seas, and I knew that she'd been sent to watch over Mawar. I knew that despite the entity's protective mission, it could be, if agitated, could cause problems for the living. It's not about good and evil, simply that such entities do not have the same values or vibrations as humans within this universe. Was it merely coincidence that Pak Karno had identified the same area as I? Well, maybe. Maybe he'd also picked up on the energy I had generated in seeing ghosts behind the wall. Or maybe there really is something important about this place. Given that both Pak Karno and I believe that such things are all in the mind, how could we both identify something paranormal in the same area? One explanation is Jung's collective unconsciousness, but I have realised that this is a simplification and slightly inaccurate. You see, we're not individuals with our own hermetic consciousness, but linked to a greater consciousness. Indeed, we hold on to individualism whilst understanding everything to be in the mind. We engage in metaphysical solipsism, which begins and ends with René Descartes' "I think, therefore I am," although the rejection of materialism for idealism is an interesting cul-de-sac. This is why the beliefs of individualism and self-interest are the opposite of what we should be striving for, and ultimately lead to evil acts through our deepest fears. We only hold on to individualism and self-interest because we are indoctrinated that we are not really capable of anything else. Therefore, when we talk of expanding our consciousness, we recognise that the mind is greater than our thoughts. Why did I see waving ghosts and Pak Karno, a half snake, half human? Well, we're from different cultures and hold different beliefs. We both knew that something from outside our current universe was there, but we interpret it very differently. As I now know that everything is an hallucination generated within our minds, even though this is simply a label which is not really defined. It is used as a put-down when doubting your reality. But all reality, even that which appears shared, is an hallucination. Indeed, it is polite misinterpretation to believe that we have a consciousness as there are many consciousnesses within our collective consciousness. It's as if each of us is hallucinating all of the time, and what we call perception involves merely selecting the one hallucination that best matches the current input. V.S. Ramachandran, The Telltale Brain, Unlocking the Mystery of Human Nature. So it is not that I refuse to believe in entities that are half snakes and half human, as anything is possible. It is simply that my brain does not interpret what I have seen as this, just as I saw Elizabethan ghosts at Shrewsbury Abbey. Despite having lived in Jakarta, Riyadh and New Orleans, I never saw a snake in the wild until I moved to the Desa in Gunung Kidul. I might add that nor did I see one in Shropshire, despite there being many adders at Prees Heath, where I used to visit the Raven Hotel every Friday night. You see, in common with my personal and anti-apartheid hero, George Formby, I misspent my youth at the Empress Ballroom in Wigan. But my own story began at the Raven. Every Friday night I would ride my moped with John Kelsall on pillion to see local teacher Martin Barfather, also known as Soul Sam, playing the latest soul discoveries. This included a revival of Al Wilson's Twisted Wheel Spin, but I never did see a snake. Unlike Pak Karno and even Mawar, my paranormal expectations were formed by David Lean's interpretation of Noel Coward's Blythe Spirit and Randall and Hopkirk deceased, all somewhat mundane and slightly comical. So despite being able to pick up on malevolence, everything I experience is a fascination and not a horror. As Pak Karno left, a feeling of serenity permeated our home. It was as though this kind man's persona had infused the fabric of our house. Now here is the important lesson. It doesn't matter what is or isn't behind our wall. What matters is that Bude and Mawar believe our house to be safe. Now they know this, they can heal themselves, both of their fears and negative thoughts, but also of physical ailments. Once we are truly comfortable within ourselves and our surroundings, the mind can do incredible things to heal our bodies. And of course, Pak Karno is well aware of this. Forgive my final comment, but did Pak Karno simply pick up on the energy I had created in seeing the ghosts and use this in his healing? I somewhat doubt it, or at least not consciously, but I had to repeat this thought. Mawar seemed to suffer no withdrawal effects from reducing the dosage of her expensive medication. But then, despite having fleetingly been a heavy drinker, she again seemingly had no habit. True, on the first night she experienced some difficulty in sleeping, but using relaxation techniques, I was quickly able to get Mawar to sleep. Within a few days she seemed visibly better. I wonder, was it the medication and not the lead being released from her bones that had clouded her mind for the last few months? Of course, it could be a combination of the lead and the medication, as when the poisons seemed to affect Mawar's thinking, the drugs seemed to kick in, but making her slower and more distant, like a temporary chemical lobotomy. After just a few more days, Mawar seemed a different person, so full of love once more, and above all, alive. Maybe I will get my Made back. Well, that concludes this chapter from my book, The Londo and the Green Queen's Revenge, which is my third book in the series. I do hope you've enjoyed it. I'm hoping to add further chapters about every week, and so far I've managed to do this. If you'd like to hear more from me, then please subscribe and hit the bell, That way you get notifications of when a new chapter is released. In addition, I don't seem to be working very well with these algorithms on YouTube, and my videos really aren't being promoted as they should. So if you could also hit the like button and sort of make some comments, I think that will help me to get noticed. I hate to ask you that, but I really do need more viewers. But thank you for this viewing. Thank you so much.